Welcome to Inspiring Teachers, a show bringing you classroom tips, motivation, and stories from successful educators. Join Tavis and Danny Hauger as they explore the why of teaching.
Welcome to Inspiring Teachers live from the Good Teaching Conference North, and the crowd goes wild.
Yeah.
That was more impressive than I thought it would be. You guys were really on.
Yeah.
We didn't warn you about any of that. That is good stuff. We're live from the Good Teaching Conference North with CTA in San Jose, California. This conference focuses on what teachers need to know to be successful in the classroom, with sessions focusing on classroom management, navigating IEPs, special education, behavior management, so many aspects of teaching.
Wonderful.
And Tavis Beam and I couldn't be more thrilled to be here. Good morning, Tavis.
Good morning, Danny. How are you today?
Oh, it's so good. I like that we didn't act like we had breakfast together.
I know, we haven't been hanging out for the last hour getting set up.
Yeah, and driving here. It's so great, and we are so grateful for CTA for bringing inspiring teachers here for this wonderful 3-hour event, talking teaching, and we're going to have some fantastic guests. In hour one, we'll be talking classroom management, the foundation for learning, with Kristen Morales and Michelle Voigt joining us at 9:45, just about a half hour from now, to talk about Shark Tank projects and other engaging ideas for the classroom. Next hour, we'll have Mike Patterson and Allison Hobrick to talk about meaningful instruction and how to be planning with explicit purposes in mind and managing equitable instruction. And in hour three, maintaining good teaching all year long, and we'll be having Dick Gale from the CTA join us as well. So a fully packed show.
Yeah, what a wonderful lineup.
And so glad to be bringing you this podcast. Again, we'll thank CTA for bringing us here. If you missed this event, don't miss the next one. Go to ctago.org and check out all the events coming in 2020 and in the future. There's just some wonderful events touring the whole state of California. And for you, Tavis, when you go to a conference, what are some of the things that you're hoping to bring back to your classroom and back to your teaching?
Well, I've been to a number of conferences. I went to a lot of the PBIS conferences and really walk away from those and these conferences and science conferences as well, just really inspired to seeing all the different things that people are doing. I really love taking actual resources and something that I can use in my classroom the next day. The theoretical stuff is wonderful too, but here is a practical application that I can walk away with. That's something I'm always looking for.
Yeah, totally. You can really come away with a lot that can benefit what you're doing. I also love the kind of the camaraderie, the sharing that goes on even while you're waiting for a conference.
Yeah.
You might end up picking up a tip that is really exceptional or refines what you do.
And the fun and the networking. I mean, just last night, if you walk down to the main area, you could see all the people networking, having a good time. It was just really wonderful to meet other people and feel like a sense of community, too.
And on a Friday night, after people have been teaching and have been at school, really cool to see everybody. And we met a few really nice people last night talking about what inspires them. And even now, setting up for the room today, talking to people who are in the room with us about what they go to for inspiration,
right?
Or
just how much fun it can be. I know that this was announced in my staff room. They're like, hey, there's a CTA conference. Everyone's like, I would teach all week. I'm not going to go to pay to a teacher conference. It's like, but no, when you come here, you it's so much fun. It's just to meet and network and learn so much.
And the thing is that teaching is a lifelong skill building career. You know, those of us who are growth minded, they're in the room here, they're attending CTA conferences. We're trying to get better because, well, for multiple reasons. How about this? I try to lead by example in my classroom, and I tell stories of success and failure.
Right.
And I'll tell them that, I'm still trying to get better. When something doesn't work in the room, I don't mind telling them, well, that's not how I planned it. In my head, this was going to go completely different, and you were there for it, and I can see now that maybe my planning fell short in this aspect or another. Here's how I can revise. And then even asking your students, hey, what about this lesson was a little bit dull or a little bit less than engaging? How could we make this better? Right. They're the ones who go through it. They have the best ideas.
It's showing them the process.
Yeah. And so what I'll do is I'll bring back a few ideas from a conference, and right away, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'll try out one thing each day.
Right. And
then I'll ask them for a little focus group. What did you think about this? Did you like the way we do this? Do you like the way we normally do this? And how can we make a hybrid that works? Because what we also find is one person's classroom and strategies do not necessarily translate to another's.
Right. And you're really bringing them in so their voice feels like they're a part of the process as well.
Yeah.
And it speaks to one of the major things that I talk about in my class, which is this philosophy I've taken from Adam Savage, which is failure is always an option. He's the myth buster. And in their show, they understand that they could always mess up. When I took this job, so I was a science teacher, I was a math teacher, and I was an elementary school teacher. And then this position opened up at a wood shop. And and I couldn't but apply to it. And I actually didn't think I would get it, but they liked what I had, and they liked my teaching experience. And I genuinely, I've been teaching for like 9 years at that point, but I was nervous because I didn't know what I was doing. I knew how to teach like an academic subject, but this is very different. And so I walked in with being very transparent with my students that failure is always an option. You're going to see me fail over and over again. And I wanted them to take that lesson and apply it to what they were doing, because they're trying something completely new as well. And I find it really interesting when a student comes to me and they've put their heart and soul into their project and it doesn't look very good. And they say, am I going to get a bad grade for this? And that to me, I really spoke to the philosophy that I wanted to teach, that it was about the quality of their engagement more than the quality of the product that they came out with.
Well, that's nice too, because you're also talking about what success means.
Right.
Is success a letter, or is success a skill and learning that happens? And I think if you can get them, because schools don't often like it when we say that grades matter little or that they don't matter.
Right.
And then we also don't like students thinking that school doesn't matter or that grades don't matter. But what we really want, if you really think about it, is for the effort and the desire to learn to be there.
Because a fear of failure can cripple you to even try. I've been there so many times, and I've known people who are highly skilled at learning things very quickly. But if they don't learn something right away, then they shut down because they have to put a little bit of effort into it. They have to work.
Well, because think of all the things that come with failure.
Right. The social stigmas that go around it. The fear that you're going to be branded. I say to my students, in math class, you get points off for something that's wrong, and then if you get enough points off that's wrong, then parents get called, and there's meetings, and there's stress.
Wow, it spirals.
Yeah, it spirals out, and so they have the underlying fear. So in the wood shop, I want to create a new environment for them where they can fail. Now, I do have a set of other things where I talk about what are you doing with your mind while you're working, what are you doing with your body, the rules, the procedures that get you to where if you fail, then it's okay.
Well, the cool thing about coming to a conference or listening to this podcast or other educational podcasts is that what you said is perfect for woodshop, but a lot of that could be used in other classroom settings as well.
Yeah.
Like, how often do we really talk to our students about what they're thinking while they're in the room or how they're approaching learning? So I teach high school history, and the same thing can be true, is that I remember being a bored high school history student. Right. I do. I remember my teacher, Mr. Doffelmeyer. And one day I tallied up how many ums he had in the room, and there were 84 in 45 minutes. And I spent most of my time rhyming with Doffelmeyer. Tire fire, rubber tire. And what's sad is those nicknames have stuck with me more so than the learning of U.S. history, which I now teach. And I think about that now and think about how many more things I could teach them if I had been paying more attention and realizing, but here's what I didn't realize. Everything that happened then is a reason for why things are the way now, and a reason for how we're going to address things in the future. And some of these things are going to affect us in the long term. Like, I'm not going to make a real big statement here, but 1920, Warren G. Harding went on a platform of America First and tariffs and border security and farming aid. And I told my students that, and I'm like, I don't know, sound familiar? Have we ever done anything, seen anything like that? And they said, I didn't know we do things like that. I'm like, history is always repeating itself. So if you can learn a little bit more about what happened before, you don't always know how to address the future. Nobody does.
Right.
But we can get some insights and connect to where we are now and where we're going and how to best approach that. And then they've bought in because they've realized that there's a reason to why we're going to learn this. There's a reason to how we are the way today. Same thing, less on the presidential side, more on the lifestyle side, the roaring 20s with consumerism and radios and theater and disposable income and credit card debt. And I'm like, doesn't that look like the America you know? Dating for the first time. How many of you were dating? And then you get them all awkward, and then you change the subject really swiftly. And you bring fun in there too, which, I mean, if you're going to come to a conference, I'm sure a lot of the people in this room and going to conferences are picking up a lot of really fun things to bring back. And you and I are examples of that too. If we're not enjoying what we're doing, why are we doing it? And when we enjoy what we do, we're more into improving, because that's going to make it better for everybody.
And really finding what your calling is. Like, I originally started teaching because of my love of science, and I quickly learned that wasn't enough. And it wasn't until I realized that I also really loved the connection that I made with the students and made that the number one priority and science the number two priority, that I really started enjoying my job a lot more, because it became something greater than just, I am this great voice for the scientific method. And now it really was about, engaging with students and teaching that for the philosophy, like I was saying, my number one philosophy. And it's guided me in my life too, is failure is always an option. Thinking about one of my students, when I taught fifth grade, it was my first year teaching fifth grade, and it was my first math lesson, and just mentioning math, he started crying, right? Just saying math, he started crying. And I realized over the year working with him how much we have to deal with the emotional relationship that a student has with the subject as much as the actual technical processes that are going into it. So I spent an entire year with the students telling him it is okay to fail at math. I'm not going to take any points away. I just want you to try, because he was so emotionally wrecked from 5 years of math class where he did not thrive in it. And once I started to heal that emotional relationship with the subject, he started doing so much better.
And what's cool is at a conference like this, at Good Teaching Conference North in San Jose, or at future CTA conferences, again, ctago.org is the website to go to. Today, you've got Catherine Wolterbrake and Jennifer Law talking about the interactive math notebooks, breaking things down, making things simpler, easier to understand, more enjoyable, more interactive. You've got Miss Bernadette Salgarino, who's here talking about depth in mathematics through illustrative math. Different strategies might help reach students in different ways, and attending a conference like this can enrich the way you look at it, because if you're struggling, or a student is struggling, or a teacher struggling with how a student is struggling, trying to do the same method again and again, that's that definition of insanity that we've heard from when we were students. And so, let's get new skills. Let's reach students in different ways. Let's be dynamic in our instruction and planning. And that's one of the cool things about attending such a large conference. We've got a diverse body of presenters. Let's continue with what we're talking about, because this first hour we're talking about good teaching. And I know that you and I both really put a lot of our focus into reaching students like that. And I don't really ever want a student to cry unless it's in my history class if we're talking about something tragic. And then I want to get to that level. And sometimes we do. But we don't want students to struggle so hard that they are just emotionally stuck. So can you tell me about what are some things that we can do to recover, or what are some things that you might do or did in that kind of a situation that may be helpful to our listeners on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, find Inspiring Teachers wherever there are podcasts? Go on.
Well, I know in my class, it's funny when I do see students starting to get frustrated with the creative process. And I've been there too, where it's like I have put so much into it. And just giving them the opportunity to take a break, step back from it, to understand that this is important, but at the same time, it's kind of a game that we're playing. And we need to keep a little bit of distance emotionally from it, not getting so wrapped up in the idea that our identity, our idea of self is necessarily equated with the grade or the end product, but that it is that process. And so reteaching that all the time, because I need to learn that all the time. I need to constantly be reminded when I fail, when I do something wrong in the classroom, that it's part of the process, and don't identify with it too much.
That's interesting. I like how you brought up math, because I think that's a lightning bolt for many students,
it really is.
And it's become part of our culture that we teach that in jokes and TV and media from a young age. It's really reinforced.
There was some research that came out a few years ago where they put people in an MRI, and the part of the brain that lit up when they do math is the same part of the brain that lights up when they're in their physical pain.
That's right. I remember reading that story.
And I think that, again, that has a lot to do with the emotional relationship that people have with math. I mean, I've had so many parents say, well, of course my kid's not good at math. I wasn't good at math. And it's like, well, that right there is kind of that story that the parents are telling, that the kids are telling, that our society is telling, is part of the problem that we have with a difficult subject like math, in my opinion.
That's a 2012 study by Lyons and Belloc, if anyone's interested in looking more about that. But so what I like to do, because sometimes it's numbers and rote memorization that can be challenging and difficult. So history has some of those dates too that I can and have the freedom to teach from a big picture perspective. And that's one of the things I really appreciate from my department at my school is what I want them to understand is not all of the dates in history, but why things happened, the lead up events, and the cause and consequence of things that happened. So I'm always trying to tell history in the story of a narrative or in the interesting plots that happen. And I rarely will ever ask for a date, unless it becomes extremely significant, because that's one of the things that made history painful or difficult for me as a child, was trying to remember all the numbers. And that's not to say we shouldn't challenge students with remembering important numbers and figures and dates, but I think that we want them to learn a different outcome
it's
than
the
a
step
memorization.
back, the larger perspective.
That's what I'm thinking.
That's going to be more seeing the forest for the individual trees.
There you go.
And yeah, for me, to kind of bounce on that a little bit, especially with more advanced students, what I really want my students to learn how to do is not come to me every time they have a question, and use the resources and teach them the resources to do it on their own. Because they say, Mr. Beam, how did you learn how to do all this stuff in the wood shop? It's like, well, when I was about your age, I was working with my dad in the wood shop, and then YouTube was invented, and that's how I've learned pretty much everything since then. And so when they come to me and say, Mr. Beam, I want to build a shelf, I'll say, okay, go watch 5 YouTube videos and then tell me how you're going to build the shelf. And then we work together on building that shelf from their own ideas of how they want to get it done. Sure, I could step in and do it for them, but that's not the point. I've even had students say, Mr. Beam, I don't know how to cut this. Will you cut it for me? It's like, no, I know how to cut. That's what I do. What I want is for you to do it, and I want you to do it wrong as long as you're doing it to the best of your ability.
Nice.
And I just love, because quite honestly, when I was a standard classroom teacher, this was always a point of contention for me, and I just love that I have the ability and the freedom to operate in that way in the wood shop.
That's a great story. We can pick up from there in a second. If anyone in the room at any point would like to come join us and ask a question and is brave enough to put a headset and a microphone on, we don't bite. We already ate, so we're not in any need to do anything like that. But if anyone should feel the need to join, please feel free. There's a chair and a headset and a microphone. No, I like that. And what you're doing is also building a self-reliance and a skill. Like, we definitely, I don't think either of us want to produce students in the age of, with all the instant tools that we have, students who are not able to use those tools, because then what is the purpose of having all that information available? It sure does make things easier too. I do the same thing. I'll let you continue.
I can't spell. I'm a horrible speller, and I've had a hard time and a hard emotional relationship with spelling my entire life. And students will come to me, I'll be walking around my classroom, and they'll have a computer in front of them, and they're trying to type a word into a Word document, and they say, Mr. Beam, how do you spell this? It's like, you literally have the greatest tool humanity has ever created. Google it. And then you're like, but I don't know the letters to the word to Google it. It's like, well, let's start working. What other context clues could you give the computer to help you find that word? Good. Like giraffe, for example. Right? As somebody who has struggled with words like that, you're J, right? And if you start with J in a Google search, the computer's not going to know what you want, and you do your best, but then you could say, okay, African animal, or long-necked, and teach them how to use the tools so they don't have to say, Mr. Beam, where's...
And then you're teaching problem solving, that they can use that in any subject. We were doing posters yesterday on fascist leaders, and not to change the subject completely, and I'm not going to, because I saw the room just look at me, and I wasn't even looking at them like, dude, get off that stuff quickly. And I'm like, all right, I will. We took a second, and we're talking about taking quotes out of context, and I lined up a bunch of different quotes from different leaders, including Gandhi and peace leaders, and talk about what it's like taking things out of context. But then, we're talking about good teaching in this first hour. What we did was I took a bunch of Gandhi quotes, and then I said, now instead of me giving you mine and then reading the book, because I didn't like learning out of the book, I'm like, you each find me 2 Gandhi quotes. Let's go outside in nature and let's feel the breeze and let's read these outside. Because why not? We have a great campus in Brentwood and we can go outside. We don't have limits. I did the same thing in math, and I'm kind of glad I don't teach math anymore. Is that okay to say? That's okay to say. We all find our calling, like you said earlier. We find what we're best called to teach. But I used to love doing geometry walks, and I'd have the students pick out shapes from the building, the construction of the rooms around us in nature, measure them with rulers and tape measures, calculate area, surface area, 3-dimensional shapes, and then sketch them. And now they're like little detectives out walking around when I was in middle school. And I had a lot of kids that day say, math was fun today. And then it reminded me to I should think about making math fun for you every day, or as many times as I can, and you can find a lot of those resources on ampeduplearning.com and searching for the Hauger History Store, or on Teachers Pay Teachers at Hauger History. And that's a free resource I have up there that people can download. So if you're listening, they loved that. And then I realized, well, let's do everything fun as much as we can, and try to make history the same way. So here's a tip for all teachers that teach almost anything. Instead of homework, which is something that's a big deal, right? In history, though, when I think about it, I think of English, science, and math being subjects we're going to have homework almost every night. I don't need to do that to them. I can be in the class with them and guide them while they're working. So I do projects that I can watch and help with, and I can be there to support them, and I don't need to add to their nightly work. I have high schoolers. A lot of them work. A lot of them do theater. They're doing The Little Mermaid right now. Shout out to the Heritage High School Theater Department. Whoop, whoop. And I know that they're up till 10 or 11 or 12. Why do I want them to go look and do work for me that I could have them do in class? So I switched 2 years ago to this 3-2-1, and it's it's funny, Tavis. People can't see me that are listening, but I just took my pen and wrote 3-2-1 on my paper.
I was observing that.
I already knew what I was talking about. No one else can see it in the room. I didn't need it for later. But what it is it's 3 things that you learned during class today, 2 things that were interesting, and 1 thing that you were curious about and have a question about still. Right. I didn't invent that. I took that from a conference, maybe a conference like this at some point. And what that does is the last part makes them inquisitive. It guides inquiry. I can check those at any time. I could wait a month. I could wait a semester. It doesn't have to be a thing that you monitor every day. I can award them points for doing it. It also documents their own learning in the classroom, so I never, ever again have heard, we don't learn anything here, because every day they have 5 things that they learned and thought were interesting. And that's very validating for you to see what they think is interesting. It informs your teaching. You can use those to teach more things like that. The questions that they have at the end, maybe they're things you didn't teach as well as you thought you did, or they wanted more of and you didn't give it to them. So you've got that. And you've got this great little journal at the end of the year of their comments about history, current events, because you could do that in any classroom too. You could pick out 3 current events. And you know what? When you practice talking current events every day, they don't become quite so divisive or quite so electrical, and you can diffuse some of the tension, because we have gotten sometimes to be a society that can't talk about things together. And I love creating an open dialogue where I don't need to give an opinion. I can just facilitate a conversation. And if it's all one-sided, I'm going to give them the opposite perspective too. And I think that is a really great community builder, that it's good teaching, it's good learning, it documents, it makes students show you what they're learning. And I do that instead of homework. So I have a couple projects through the year, but other than that, that's all they need to do. And then maybe an exit ticket at the end for whatever you taught that day. And I love that. I think that has changed the way I teach history a lot. It's taken a lot of the dislike of history for some of the students that had it from previous teachers. And it also gives you that 4 or 5 minutes, because I also have a historical journal at the start with here's what happened today in 1900. And then they have to respond to it. It gives you that 4 or 5 minutes of quiet setup time to take attendance and do the things you need to do to feel in control of your classroom. Yeah. Those are some of my favorite tips from my room.
Yeah, it's like you're asking the question, what do you ultimately want them to walk away with at the end of the year?
Yeah.
Right. And I like to think about what do I remember from when I was in middle school? Right. Not a whole lot of content. But what I do remember are the people, the teachers. I remember who they were. And I remember if they were interested and interesting as a person. If they were interested in what they were talking about, and that was apparent, and they were interesting as an individual, that has stuck with me way longer than any of the content. And that inspires me to be more engaged in that content.
Hashtag inspire teachers.
Hashtag inspire teachers.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Really, I like taking that kind of global teaching perspective of what is the ultimate goal? What are they going to get? You definitely want to set up a foundation for whatever that next level is, where they're going. You want them to walk in with a strong understanding of the level that you were supposed to teach them. But at the same time, I think that it's okay to pull back a little bit from that, like you're saying, and not focus so much on the rigor of dates perhaps, but concepts and writing about how this affects their lives today, so that they're more likely to have, again, a positive emotional relationship with the subject when they walk into the next teacher.
Well, there's a lot there. That before we move on too far from it, that full school year of journals, if you're on a block schedule, it's $3.49 on Amped Up Learning at the Hauger History Store. Amped Up Learning is a teacher-owned business too, so we like supporting them. So what else that I found on what you're saying is something else that I've improved, and going to conferences has helped me see the value of this too. Not teaching the same way every day. So in history or any subject really, in any grade level, if you just did a read and answer questions on Monday, then Tuesday, let's try doing something visual.
Right.
Let's do a gallery walk and let's put pictures up around the room. If you set that up right, if you just put pictures up around the room, like go look at these things and think about them, they'll be talking about their weekend and the Warriors game that night. And you might not get what you want, but a lot of good teaching is setting up the expectation and telling the story of, again, why is this history lesson important? So when you walk around the room today, there are photos from the Great Depression. 70% of America suddenly in poverty. Your family, imagine if they had lost their income and their stocks and they have no safety blanket, and now you're needing to collect cans before school or work a second or a third job to help your parents. Now look around at these images and pretend that you're living in this time period. What are you thinking? What are you hearing? What are you sensing? And then tell a personal story about, when I graduated from college, it was the Great Recession, 2007. College unemployment was 35%. And I told them how I worked 4 jobs, and I worked, I think at one point, 278 straight days. And I didn't have days off, and I didn't have a full-time salary or benefits. And then tell them that, you're fortunate to be living in a time where the economy is stronger and unemployment is lower. Anything can happen, and how would you prepare yourself? And then when you get them into the sense that these kinds of things are living, or that the history is living, now they can sense when you're into a lesson, right? I think everyone in this room knows when you're hooked in and you're passionate and they sense it and you've got that connection and they're in your hand and you're like, this is why we teach. This is what we're doing right now.
And imagine,
having as many moments as like
sadly, imagine in 10 years, 15 years, they're actually in that situation where they're having to work 4 jobs for 250 consecutive days. And all of a sudden they remember Mr. Hauger talking about that. And now they have a context for understanding the circumstances that are outside of just blaming the world around them, but like seeing the actual systems that have put them in that place.
Well, yeah, I kind of hope I'm building responsible citizens. And I think a lot of our elementary teachers are doing a great job of that too, with the way we treat each other.
Right.
But telling those personal stories does a few things. It emboldens that relationship between teacher and student. They care more about you as a person. I never have behavior problems when they care about me as a person, because they know that I care about them and I've tried to make a great environment for them. So they're not going to act up and be rude to you. It's really hard to be a jerk to someone who's really cool to you, or who really tries. And when it's authentic, they can tell. And I think they know when it's phony too. They can tell when I've had a day where I might be mailing it in a little bit for a few minutes. And then it reminds me like, hey dude, be here right now with them. And it also shows that adults can be honest and have a good relationship with young people. And I think that that's a big part of what I'm trying to do, in that let's look through the veneer of me being the teacher above you and you the student below me, and let's be together. And can we learn together? And now back to your thing, can you look up more? I give them baseball cards for extra credit. That I got a giant box of baseball cards for $10. There's like 10,000 cards. And then they're worth a certain amount of extra credit at the end, where when they are interested in find me a piece of information on their phones, reward it. When they have a question that is not what we're talking about, reward it. If it's off topic, I have a parking lot on my wall for questions that are off topic that we can come back to later. I want their curiosity to guide me as much as I'm guiding them.
And that was the first half hour of our presentation. We have so many great guests coming up for you on next week's Inspiring Teachers, and you can watch all the episodes now on YouTube at the Inspiring Teachers channel. This is Danny Hauger thanking CTA, Amped Up Learning, and Media Spark for supporting our show. We'll see you next week.